Well, so first of all, who are we and why do we want to talk about cultural fluency here today? This is us. This is me. My name is Alberta. I work at Elsevier, which is a company that started off as a publishing house for scientific books and journals, and now has expanded into a global provider of insights whose mission is to advance science and knowledge.
And I'm Martina, and like many people here at the conference, I have moved from working inside organizations, anything from being the first hire in a startup to working, leading global teams in tech giants, and anything in between, to really helping organizations from the outside now in becoming more successful in their ways of working and in the way they do innovation, and also help individuals and coach them through that.
So we should also add that I'm Italian and Martina is German, and now we live in the UK, and that will come into play soon. You'll understand why I am mentioning this. Now, before we get into the bulk of the thing, what I would like to do, Eric, can I ask you to sit at the second table here? There's a reason for that. So could we ask you to spend a few minutes to introduce yourselves to your peers that are sitting at the table, and just share who you are, what you do, and where you come from. Thank you. Very good. Come here. Or you have a little group there? Okay, we're doing table introductions. Please come and join a table, because we're working in groups. Do you want to, Todd, do you want to come here? Because I'm trying to put people of different ethnicities together. Yeah. I don't think we're going to have an issue with time. Yeah. Okay, we're giving it another minute. Okay, 1 more minute and then we start. All right. Okay, so now that you're all best friends, we can start, right? We need to make a disclaimer before we start. So this conversation that we're having today in this conversation, we will refer to the Americans, the Italians, the French, the Indian. This is not talking about the people. We're referring to, cultural norms and cultural stereotypes. So it's not directed at any specific group, but we're going to be using that language just to explain concepts. Please do not take this as, stereotyping or making, general statements. And we're going to start with a story. As I said at the beginning, I'm Italian. I lived in America on the west coast of the United States for a long time. And in 2014, I moved to the UK. And my first job was at an agency. I was hired as director of UX, and they had hired, there was a very small design team. And they had hired specifically a week before a UX designer, Irish guy. I go there my first day, and on my desk, I find all of my equipment, and then there is a report. And it was a report on a specific project that started with a definition of information architecture. I read through the definition, which was factually incorrect. The report was absolutely great in every other aspect, but this particular definition was incorrect. So what do? Take my Sharpie, put a cross on it, and write no. And then I don't think about it. So I go about my day, I meet the team, I meet people, and then this person comes to me and says, "Did you see the report?" And I said, "Yeah, it was actually a really great report. Do you want to go through it together? I have some questions to make. I made some comments, but it was a great report, great piece of work." I opened the report, and the first thing he sees is a big black cross and no. And I saw his face fall, right? So, no matter how much I explained to him that was for me, it was a note for me, that I didn't mean to say that he was not competent, et cetera, and that's how, in Italy and in America, you make notes. I quite never regain his trust. He was and is a great designer, but because I could not communicate in a way that he understood, I completely lost his trust. So wherever you are, Paul, I'm really, really sorry. I still am sorry about this. So this is one of the many examples of how things, even said in the same language, don't quite translate. So much so that, for instance, if you move from the United States to the UK, or from the UK to the United States, you will find something like this. Handy. It's what the British say, what they mean, and what others understand. For instance, if someone says, "That is a very brave proposal in England," that means you're completely insane, but I would think he thinks I have courage, right? We talked about courage yesterday, and there are so many things like that. Where was it? "I'm sure it's my fault." But what they mean, it's your fault. And you think, well, why do they think they're at fault, right? We don't understand it. So, of course, culture is not just about language. it's about a multitude of things. And we want to start today talking about differences in cultures and how they impact our work, starting with this concept of time. So we're in India. We heard yesterday, Naresh was talking about Indian time, right? And, you know, of course, you've heard about Spanish time, Italian time, Swiss time, German time, right? So let's take a few minutes for you guys to talk amongst yourselves on your tables about your relationship with time. You can talk about what you would say, for instance, if you have an appointment and you're running late, how do you go about planning something in the future, like a vacation? Just, you know, talk about time, you know, how you relate to time. Are you late? Are you on time? Are you early to an appointment? Just figure it out, and then we'll hear a few examples.
Or even what late means.
Yes. Perfect. So, Martina, do you want to start? Oh, no, that's Martina. Do you want to start? Okay, so should we start? Should we hear about how you think about time? Martina, do you?
Stories to share. Who wants to start? Yeah.
So on this table, we have 3 from India. So what we did here, we compared, instead of doing examples from Bangalore, Pune, and Delhi, we said, okay, let's compare between India and Netherlands. So, so the scenario was again the same scenario that you have doctor appointment and then you are 10 minutes late. So here, first case, most of the people, they don't even care about the appointment here in India. We'll go with our own time and then it's my turn. But in some of the cases we discuss, we tend to add some lies, like it's a kind of traffic situation, right? Most of the cases, this is not a kind of lie, but it's a kind of situation.
What do you do when you're late? And my answer was, I'm never late. I hate being late.
What you said when
You know, if I'm late, if it ever happens, then there's a very good reason for it. And it's probably on the news, so.
Yeah, but those jokes apart, but the main thing is we normally, India also, I'm not saying that we always do the bad things. It's a kind of, we have 99% people who actually talk about it and do a kind of request of rescheduling or maybe giving a turn to someone who is behind the appointment. Yep, so that's it.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Who's next? Coming over.
Hi. So here we didn't manage to get through everybody, but then we talked about 3 dimensions. Basically, one is of being on time, and what do you do when you're not on time, and then also of some travel planning. And there's one person here who's extremely organized, in our opinion, like who plans travel like a year in advance, etc., and then accounts for time and being on time most of the time. There's a couple of us who are always almost on time, and when we are not on time, the common trait was that we make it a point to communicate very clearly that we are not going to be on time and what the reason is for that. Personally speaking, I was not in the country for a couple of decades, so that has kind of influenced my time sensitivities a little more. But one thing I would like to say is, based on where we were and where we are, I think 99% of the people here, the time sensitivity has increased tremendously. Most everybody is on time or do a really good job of communicating. Even workers, for example, who come home, handymen, etc., there is always a very small margin where they are able to come and they communicate. So I feel really happy that the time sensitivity in Bangalore, as a small sample size, if I were to take, has increased tremendously over the past few years.
Thank you so much. Who's next? Fantastic.
Just to summarize on this table, if there is a commitment or if there is things that people like, they're always on time. When things that they personally feel it doesn't add much value, let's say I'm doing certain things for others, then potentially it's being pushed to the right. When we say push to the right, it is more so, it is not always going late, but we don't give preference to it. And the last one was, professionally, I think we are all much, much better than how we were. Probably even in our initial days, there were days, personally speaking, there were days where I would be late. I didn't understand the value of it. But now I manage a certain set of people. I go back to them to kind of let them know how it is important to be on time, actually. So over the years, I could see myself improving that aspect. So, yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much. So I'm particularly interested in this table because there are very different cultures, but let's hold that thought and let's hold all these thoughts about time in mind, because if you think about it, we are in the business of planning and making things happen, right? That's what we do. And so how we think about time has a tremendous impact on how we make those things happen, despite all the frameworks that we've learned about. And I think it's really interesting. So this is how most Western cultures think about time, right? And again, remember the disclaimer I'm talking, it's generalizing. So we think about time in a linear way where there is a past that's behind us, where is a present where we are, and there is a future and there is a direction of travel. Often we talk about the journey, we talk about, death is, we talk about death as the end of the road. We think about it as a straight line. However, not every culture thinks this way. So we can talk about circular time as a contrast to linear time. So we're talking about, time as a recurring cycles where the past is the past, but it's not really the past because it will happen again in the future, right? So we talk about, scenery, you are in the present, but you know that the past is gonna come back. So it's all very mixed and it's not super conducive to planning. And in cultures that have a tradition of observing a cyclic time, which tends to be most Asian cultures, there are completely different patterns when it comes, for instance, to how you make decisions, how you get to decisions. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. There is, however, a very specific, so typically time in different cultures is either linear or cyclic. There is an exception that I think is absolutely fascinating, and that takes place in Madagascar. So in Madagascar, they think about time this way. The past is visible and influential. There is a big cult of the ancestors, and so what you can see in front of you is the past. And I see you taking a photo. I realize that this is very small, but we will be sharing the slide. You can take all the photos you want, but I know they're not very readable. So the past is in front of you. It's the future comes at you from behind. You don't see it coming, and the present is kind of like corner side of the eye. In this type of culture, is next to impossible to plan for anything. So plans are loose. Think about, and I've seen this happen in some countries in Africa where they, this is typical of Madagascar, but there are adaptations where, the way you take the bus is not you get the ticket to your destination, you get on the bus, and you know that eventually you'll get there. So you buy a ticket for the bus, you go to the bus stop, other people come, the bus eventually shows up, and then it's more like, okay, who needs to go where, and the majority wins. And so eventually you will get to where you need to go, but you don't know. So the future is completely unknowable. Imagine what it is to plan a scrum or a sprint in there, in those places. Very, very difficult. Now, let's go back to linear time. So as I said, past, present, and future. Past is over, present is here, future is something that we can plan for. So it's not uncommon when you think about this way to think that you can fraction and allocate time, right? So you think about how you're going to do your tasks. You talk about, you can almost see the value of this time. You can quantify how this time, because you can split it this way. This is over, I'm not thinking about it. This is today, I have A, B, C, and D, et cetera, et cetera. This is what's happening in January. This is what I might have to worry next month. So you can quantify it, you can monetize it. This is a roadmap, right? You can create a roadmap based on your perception of time. And this is really good, and encounters, kind of like no challenges in those geographies and in those cultures where the task and the completion of a task, and we'll get to that, is more important than the relationship. As I said, Martina is German. In Germany, you can count on the fact that if task D is scheduled for 3 p.m., at 3 p.m. that task is going to start. For me, instead, in theory, this is the same theory, right? I have lunch from 12 to 2. However, this is really what happens. Here I went a little late, this delayed, I start lunch at 2, it finishes at 4, and I really don't worry about the rest. And this is because we're, in cultures that follow rigidly linear times, there is a respect of the task and the boundary. For other cultures like the Italians, the Spanish, I don't want to say the French because we have a French person in the audience. Relationships, oh my God. Relationships trump, the relationship is the accomplishment. So if starting a task on time means that I cannot have finish a conversation with you, that for me is a loss. That's the value of time for us. And then there is, we talked about, so these are different type of linear times. Monochromic, and we'll have a list of the differences. Monochromic time is you do one thing at a time and you follow the schedule. This is multi-active or polychronic time, which is how I grew up. And then there is cyclic time, which looks completely different. So the tasks are not considered as a sequence. It's a much more systemic approach. They're considered in their entirety, and there is something about circling the pond. So considering all the tasks and all the challenges at once, and making decisions after completely different, after having completed a set of consideration, which means that you might decide after careful consideration that task A, D, and F are priority, G will happen, and these 3 actually, we don't need that because we know that eventually time will come back to us and we're gonna be able to reconsider this. So this is more typical in Asian cultures. That's not to say that all Asian cultures are the same. For instance, if you look at how Japan and China are, consider time, in Japan, there's a fair attention, there is careful attention for personal relationships, which would make it very similar to my multi-active time. However, there is also a strong emphasis on doing the appropriate thing at the right time. So there's built-in time for the relationship, but at the same time, the structure, it's a lot more rigid. So chronemics is actually the name. I thought it was really interesting. It's actually the name that we give to the type of times, and this is how you can think about the differences. People on polychromic time, this is always linear, have a flexible attitude towards schedules, group tasks together and perform them simultaneously, build strong relationship with people, and you'll have the slides so you can read the rest. And by contrast, people on monochromic time thoroughly plan and schedule their activities, never multitask, and do not waste time making small talk at work. So you can start seeing how the way you think your culture thinks about time can have an impact on what happens when you're at work, when you're planning a piece of work, when you're reporting on a piece of work, et cetera, et cetera. And this is my favorite definition about time, and that is that time is the heartbeat of culture. And now we finally go into culture. So, we want to go back now to the tables. And we'd like for you to think about your culture. You heard a little bit about time. What makes your culture different from others? And we have some prompts for you. You don't have to answer these questions. These are just guidelines. But we're going to give you a few minutes to talk amongst you and share something about where you are. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and forgive me, I don't I don't know if they're in the room. We were discussing some management, some management theories, and we're talking about personal histories exercise, which is really important when you're trying, when you're looking at leadership in a global team. So consider this your personal history exercise and share with your table for 5 minutes on one of these questions and how you think it influenced your culture or anything else that you'd like.
Maybe I'll quickly read them out, just in case you can't read them at the back of the room.
Yeah.
So we have questions like, where did you grow up? What is something about your culture that others might not know? Or what is a misconception about your culture? One on a more personal basis, how many siblings do you have and where do you fall in that order? What is a unique or interesting challenge or perhaps an experience from your childhood or really anything else a question you want to answer to share a little bit about your cultural context?
5 minutes.
And I'll come back around for you to share some stories.
Stop the... Is it minutes or... Perfect. Yeah. I'm going to. Okay. I'm spying on you. Coming from behind.
I was going to say to Martina, my wife is German, so I'm saying both sides, because let's not bring her Deutsche.
We don't do that. Let's not bring politics into it. The monster, Nessie. Nessie the monster. Actually, in Scotland, you can. Do you own a kilt though? Of course you do. Of course. You don't have tartan. Yeah, I would be very. Yeah. So I. Yeah. So I actually did buy. We went to. So Robert Burns is kind of like the bard, the national poet of Scotland, right? And hero. Yes, yes. And so they do this very, they celebrate his birthday. And so we go to, so my partner went to University of Glasgow, and he's from Falkirk, but went to University of Glasgow for everything through his PhD. And their alumni dinner is, they do it in all cities, it's a fundraising event, effectively. So I had to buy his tartan, a stole in his tartan. Yeah, and then you become part of the family. Very in Gaelic. Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. It's such a good tradition, and I think, so the UK, coming to the UK as a foreigner, the UK is very diverse, right? And you can absolutely tell that the English are very different from the Scottish, and from the Welsh kind of don't matter, right? We can say that. We cannot say that. Yeah, yes. But I think Scotland is the closest place in the UK to, Southern European or Indian culture, where there's a lot of value on tradition, dancing, foods. Yeah, it's very cool. So they have like this. It's kind of like Bollywood of the Highlands, of course. Sorry, Scotland. Yes, yeah. So yeah, I can actually show you.
Okay. Yes.
Do I need to use the mummy voice?
I'm loving the discussion, but who wants to share first? And maybe we'll hear first from one of the tables that hasn't shared in the last session. Any thoughts? Do you want to get started?
I can give a very French example where we refer to time to refer to something else. So if somebody tells, oh, did you know so-and-so is having a little 5 to 7, that person's having an affair. 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., they're somewhere else. In Africa, it's called going to the second office, because if the wife calls, the man says, I'm at the office. And there's this also very French concept of time called the month of August. If you've ever worked with the French, you know what happens in August.
Nobody works.
Nobody works. You don't even need to say it. It's August. Why are you even asking? So 2 times that have translated into cultural events beyond
Very
explanation.
cool.
I want this month of August. I really like the sound of that. Have you got anything to share?
So I'm Craig and I'm from Scotland, and I grew up in Dunblane, which is a small town in the middle of Scotland that sits almost on the boundary between the more built-up middle, but you can also see the Highlands as well, so it's kind of like a mixture of different historic cultures. The thing about the culture that people may not know, well, as soon as I mentioned Nessie, then everybody knew about Nessie. Scottish culture is well known. And misconception, stereotype, well, there's lots of things about the Scottish accent that everybody sounds like Scotty from Star Trek, and so on. So, and I'm married to a German, so I'm seeing both sides of different cultures as well. Germans are very strict and orderly and don't like ambiguity, and I'm a bit more flexible. So yeah. So what do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't mind. No, that's not an acceptable answer, right? What's the other questions?
Yeah, should we? Let's.
Who's next? Eric, we're coming over.
So this was a lot of fun for me because I was born in Colombia. My brother was born in the Netherlands. I was a kid in Spain. I was a teenager in the Sultanate of Oman. So I don't understand what culture I have.
Okay, let me ask you a question then, Eric. Where is home?
That's a very good question because I spent most of my youth trying to decide between Colombia and the Netherlands. And then I was sent to Spain for a business trip, and that's the moment I discovered I'm actually Spanish.
Okay, fair enough. All right, should we hear from someone from our host country, from India?
Please. Who would like to share?
Hello. So on our table, we were discussing how we are from different parts of India. So some are North Indian, some are South Indian. And for me personally, I have stayed in North India. I had done my schooling there and then moved to South. So I've been at both the places for a considerable amount of time. So we were just discussing on how the perspective is different between the people who are from there or here. Like their life is more slow-paced because lack of IT culture, mostly like if you're from somewhere where there's no IT culture, people are more used to a slow life. And here we are more fast-paced. We respect each other's time or appointments, but people there could be slightly slow-paced, kind of take each other's time more for granted, and they don't really mind it. So yeah, for them it's difficult to understand how our day goes and how it's more fast-paced for us. So yeah, we were just discussing how that is different for people. Yeah.
Okay, so should we go? Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. Now, let's start looking at how, your culture, which for some people is where you come from, for some people is where you discover you are from, right? How your culture then has an impact on how you work, especially in the context of how we're working right now, where ages ago, or maybe definitely my father's generation, someone who was from somewhere else was the exception. Now it's kind of the norm, right? Because if you don't have a foreigner in your office, you definitely have a foreigner or more on your Teams calls, right? We're all part of these multicultural teams. When I look at my own at Elsevier, I have from the West Coast of the United States, West Coast, Mountain Time, Eastern Times, people in the Netherlands, people in the UK, people in Romania, people in India, people in China, right? It's a big spread, and that's the norm for everybody. So let's take a look at how these, all these cultural traits have an impact on how we work. And we're gonna do that using a blueprint, and we have printouts, so we're gonna be doing an exercise in a minute. But we're gonna be looking at a framework that has been that looks at different dimensions of your culture. So we've talked about time a little bit. You've shared things about your culture that are different and that are unique to where you come from. We're going to be using this framework that's based on this book, which is amazing. We'll share it in the resource. It's called The Culture Map. And Erin Meyer is actually one of those cultural consultants, among other things, that gets called in when you are an executive in a company and they send you on an assignment to a different country, different continent, and you don't know how to behave and you have to function in that environment, right? So the dimensions, and Martina's gonna take us through the various dimensions, but the dimensions that we're going to be looking at are communicating, so how we communicate, evaluating, how we make, how we determine whether we want to do a thing or not, persuading, how, we've heard in other sessions talking about business cases, convincing your stakeholders, so how do we do it on the basis of our culture, how we lead, how we decide, how we trust, which is very important, how we disagree, and how we schedule. Now, please, I want to remind you once more our disclaimer. This is not about any specific person or any specific country. These are general norms, okay?
And sure, I can also do it for me.
Yeah.
We also have the definitions on the piece of paper. So in case you can't, you will likely
we'll
not be able
give them
read
to you for an exercise. There are all the definitions, but if you want to show
I just
them.
want to run through those, yes. So the first one, when we're talking about communicating, we already have a few interesting communication styles here today. We're looking at low context and high context. And yesterday, around the conference, I heard a few people talking about that. Oh yeah, around here, we're very much a high context culture when it comes to communicating. So a really good communication is all about being sophisticated, nuanced, layered. We're not necessarily spelling everything out. We're expecting people to infer from what we're saying what we mean. And so it's all about being able to read between the lines, and messages are often implied instead of being plainly expressed. And you can imagine, being German, and we're talking about cultural norms and stereotypes, my experience where I've grown up
right here
is very much at the low context side of the scale. That means communication is very much like we're spelling everything out. Communication is precise. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. We're not expecting people to read between the lines to understand what we mean. You can imagine me moving from Germany even to the UK, which is quite close on this side of the scale area. And we had that lovely translation earlier in the slides. Really, really interesting when you're moving to a country where everything is inferred rather than what you're plainly actually telling someone in plain words.
India, in case you wondered, is right here on the spectrum. And keep in mind that this is not scientific, right? It's based on observation, et cetera, et cetera. But India is right here.
Absolutely. But Erin Meyer has done a ton of research into actually developing these dimensions of culture. And she also points out, of course, everything is relative. So for me, moving from here to here was a massive culture shock, right? It's a very, very short space of travel, but a completely different way of actually communicating with each other. So imagining moving from Germany, talking to you all here in India, you're probably thinking, oh my God, she is so rude. Why is she being so blunt?
Okay, let's move on.
Absolutely.
Evaluating.
Yeah, please let me.
Yeah, there you go.
Excellent. So in terms of evaluation in organizations, radical candor in the last few years has been like the pinnacle of how you give feedback, right? It's kind to be direct, it's kind to share negative feedback. Not in every culture, obviously. And direct negative feedback, much more valued and much more appreciated in cultures like Israel was famous for it. Other cultures feel like, oh gosh, Israelis are so direct and so blunt in how they share feedback. Germany's up there as well. But very much direct negative feedback is seen as something positive, something, we're being generous with being able to share that. It's usually given standalone rather than shared within a lot of positive feedback, which is more of a Anglican culture, sort of that, I don't know if you're aware of that sort of notion of shit sandwich. I'll say something nice, then I'll give you the actual negative feedback, then I'll say something nice again, versus, indirect feedback, really appreciating softly, subtle, and diplomatically delivered feedback that might not even be given directly to you. Let me move on to the next one. Not moving. When it comes to persuading, very much, again, either a principles first or an application first approach. Principles first simply meaning I really need to lay out the theory first, explaining why do I, on what scientific basis am I making this recommendation, then I can move on to the actual application of that. Very much favored in actually Italy, more so than everybody else.
You asked us the number for an invoice. We start from when the tree was planted. And then felled, and then milled, and then you made paper, and then maybe we'll give you the invoice number.
Absolutely. Whereas the opposite is also true in terms of US. Actually, interestingly, at the flip side of the scale, very much application first. We're leading with, the current idea, the current context. We're beginning with a fact, the statement, or an opinion, and later we're adding the concepts to back that up, rather than the other way around. Let me move on to the next one. It's all about leading. Egalitarian, and I think the Scandinavian countries are famous in this respect for the ideal distance between leadership and the team is really on par, like on the same level. So organization structures are flat, communication often skips organizational hierarchies. And on the other end of the scale, in a hierarchical culture, Japan being an example here at the far end, but India also on the side of the scale, the ideal distance between the boss and the subordinate is quite high, and is really important also for status and for to respect that hierarchy and how we're talking to each other to influence. So organizational structures are multi-layered and feel more fixed, and communication really follows that set hierarchical line. We'll move on to the next one, so we can get into the next activity. Deciding, either consensual, so we're trying to actually gain a consensus amongst the group before we agree, and we all want to agree together, versus top-down, where it's very much leadership makes a decision and expects the team to follow suit. Interestingly enough, not every hierarchical culture follows the top-down decision-making approach. I think Japan is a really interesting outlier in this way, approach, where it's very much at the far end of consensual and at the far end of hierarchical as well. Trusting. we're either working on a task-based end of the axis, so I trust you if you're doing your job well, you're on time, I can depend on you. It's all about practicalities. And if you're doing good work, you're reliable, I enjoy working with you, I trust you. At the other end of the scale, relationship-based, yes, very much. Goes with a multi-active time, actually. Looking at trust is built very much like you would outside of work with your family and friends. Trust is built through sharing meals, evening drinks, visits at the coffee machine. It's all about developing working relationships. And it's a lot slower to build, but then you really have a relationship for life more. And finally, it's a final one, no?
No, disagreeing.
Disagreeing is confrontational. I can actually bluntly tell you that I'm disagreeing with you. So debate is positive, being actually, open confrontation is appropriate. It will not negatively impact your standing in the organization. But it's really important to know how you're, in what circumstances it's okay to disagree and be confrontational, and in what ways might be considered really offensive. And avoidant, really being indirect, and disagreement and debate are negative for the team and the organization, and open confrontation is inappropriate and will break up group harmony. We're looking at scheduling next, linear time, and I think we're coming back to what...
We're coming full circle.
Absolutely. Linear time, we already spoke about this versus flexible time, so I will skip over more details of that one.
Now, it's time for you to draw your own culture map, right? So...
we have papers at the front, so everyone gets a culture map of their own.
You've seen how, culture is both what we carry with us and also what we pick up along the way, right? I think Eric is the perfect example. I have similar experiences where I come from a multicultural family. I moved around a lot. I work in global teams. And so I asked you the question, Eric, where is home? Because I don't know how to answer that question for me, right? I know that there are places where my DNA is happy. India, one of them. And I think it's all because of the food. But I really have no concept of being home, of where home is. And that impacts also, it makes me flexible and adaptable, but it also makes me kind of like wandering around. So, which is good and bad when you need to work. So we have prepared now, actually, worksheets with the definitions and also the culture map. And we'd like for you to spend some time thinking about where you see yourself on that culture map. And then we're going to have a little bit of a check-in of where we are, how we use this, why it matters when we're actually trying to get stuff done. My hands are not handing at the moment. I should probably not. God. Okay. Sorry. There you go. There you go. There you go. That's your. And this. Okay, we're good. Excellent. Yeah, are those leftovers? Okay. And we can also leave them for people to take if they want.
We have a few extras in case you want.
If you need pens, because here they only give pencils. Sorry.
If you want to use a pen, let me know.
right? And remembering where the positioning was, but it's, you know, how you see yourself on those spectrums on the back of your experiences. German is a straight line.
It's the right one.
Yes. Sure.
To add certain pointers or just choose
No,
the
just
option?
mark where you think you are on the continuum.
Yeah, just mark it.
Yeah, and
The
just
definitions are already here.
yeah, the definitions are here, so we don't expect you to remember from the slides.
I was thinking we could another country called Gen Z.
Yes, that's a completely different thing, but that's our fault because we created that. I said, this is not about being right. It's about where you see yourselves. I'm loving the ambiguity. I'm loving it.
It's clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not a test. There's no
So, yeah, great.
marking or anything.
Yes. So just a lovely question there. Do we have to be at either end? No, it's an absolute gradient. So anywhere on the line where you feel like you feel well represented. I can imagine that some of it is causing a bit of discomfort, but you know, feel free to just explore a little bit of that and just even notice where is it comfortable and where not.
See where Scotland puts themselves. Of course you don't. Yeah, but you know, we're all on a continuum, right? You're done? Yeah, that's okay. You can circulate it. Yeah, so context is more about how we talk about how much background information we include on the thing that we're talking about. Say, so you go to the States, they will tell you, here's, you know, here's the problem, here's the solution, and here are the steps. You come to Italy, I say, well, you remember that 3 years ago, we started thinking about this product, and, you know, the idea originated from here, and then it went to this person, and now I'm dealing with it, but we have an issue, and then they give you all sort of contextual information to help you understand the problem better. It's and we're all, you know, kind of like different countries. My observation is that countries with a richer history tend to give, or a longer history, tend to give much more context than, so you think America's been around 250 years, right? They got no history. And actually, I have a really interesting tidbit about Bose. When my oldest daughter was born, unfortunately, she was very sick, and so she had to be in the NICU in the hospital, right? And next to her bed, there was this little boy. His family was Indian. His name was Udaya Bose. And the mom could not produce enough milk for the baby. And the nurses, by mistake, I could make a lot of milk. The nurses, by mistake, gave Diane my milk. And then we became friends because our kids were, brothers and sister in milk. It was very cute, but I always remember, yes. Yeah. So you're family now.
So this
Yeah,
phrase
you are family.
Alberta said was like, this is very interesting. Positive messages used around negative ones. It's like saying,
I think that
I've got an idea for how you're talking to be even better, implying that it's really terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, but actually I have an even more fun story about, the weather in Los Angeles is very warm, right, and very sunny, and when I spend a lot of time in the sun, I become really, really dark. I decided not to dye my hair, so it's going gray, but I always dyed it very dark. And I used to go get coffee at a Starbucks around my house, and there was this old Indian lady who, for some reason, was convinced that I was Indian, and she kept speaking to me in English. And I was telling her, Mom, Indian, I had a braid and I have something in my nose. Yeah. And she kept saying, she kept crying to me, and I didn't want to offend her. I kept telling her, I'm Italian. And one day she said, you don't have to be ashamed of your origin. And so I had to show her. Next time I brought my passport to show her, I'm not ashamed. I'm not. Because she saw me all the time because she ran a Indian vegetarian. It was a market, but they made vegetarian food. It was amazing. Like it was called Samosa House, but they had all sorts of dal and spices, and it was really good. And I kept going there to buy stuff, right? But she was convinced I was Indian, and she was very disappointed. It's her own research. Yeah, from the book, yes. So you see,
Yes.
everything is credited. So it's not our data, it's her data. Okay. So, do we have our maps done? Yeah. Now, let's see. As I said, this was not homework. There was no markings, but we'd like to show you how you can use these maps, especially when you work in a different context. So, this is the map. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm from Italy. So when I look at myself along the same, spectrum that you looked at yourselves, that's pretty much where I am. A little bit all over the place, isn't it? But, I was born in Italy, I went to school in Italy, and then I moved to the US. And I had, I moved there with my culture, with my way of doing things, which was that one. This was especially grating for Americans because in America, and we can't really see because the light is very strong, but the American line goes kind of like this. Application first, you see how different it is, right? And then from the States, I moved to the UK. And the UK is yet different. And then I started working with her, right? She's German. Remember time, linear time? That's Martina. That is Martina. So it's, you know, we're similar in a lot of ways, but we've got some fundamental differences that make it sometimes challenging if we weren't aware of this. And then let's imagine that so Martina and I have different day jobs, but we do a lot of work on leadership, on culture, all over the world. We go and work in Japan, and it looks a little bit like this. Actually, let's see if we can turn down the light a little so you guys can see what the difference is. Yeah, I got it. I don't know which one it, oops. Well, clearly, hey, you can see very well right now. I have no, God, I don't know what I did.
But you'll notice
I liked it though.
the red line for Japan, very much opposite to most others in most ways.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna bump into something. Yeah, thank you. Cool, thank you. Yes, so you see, you know, there is no right or wrong. But when you are, say, so Germany, let's look at confrontation. Let's embarrass Martina. You know, very direct approach to confrontation, and you are working with a culture like the Japanese culture, within a culture where you are on the opposite. This is where you have to pay attention. So it doesn't so much matter where you fall on the spectrum, but where it matters is how distant you are from the people you work with. Because that's where the potential for conflict, misunderstanding, challenges arises. I think we can turn the light on, and we'll have this slide in maybe can. Oh. Okay, experiments in lighting. Should we leave it like this for a second? Okay, we can leave it off. We don't need to write anything anymore.
Oh yeah, let's do that again. So, white was Italy.
So white was Italy. It's the
red is Japan.
Hold on. Yeah, so that's Italy. You see the country here. So that's where I was born. This is blue. You can't really see it with the light on. Is where I moved to. That's the UK, where I now live and where Martina and I work. And then green is Martina, the cultural code. And this is like a sample. We could have put India in here, but that would have been kind of like cheating because we're in India, right? So we're talking about ourselves and other people that we don't know. Oh, actually, sorry, Todd and Amber, you both are Americans. Cool. So when we look at the differences, and you look at your own culture maps, right? Is there something in particular that you've noticed? Is it helping you understand some of the things that are happening at work when you're working, say, with a PM from Finland or a Scrum Master from Madagascar?
I don't even know that I have to go out of the country to see a difference. But within the organization that I work with, so I'm at a leadership level. I have people reporting into me, and obviously I'm reporting up the hierarchy as well. So the kind of leader I have always wanted for me, I'm trying to be that leader for my team.
Right.
So in the course of doing that, what I see is when I look at this map, I find myself to be doing a lot of things which are not necessarily coming in from the culture where I come from. But if I look up the hierarchies, I am potentially continuing to do the things that I would typically do because of my culture. So there is a difference in that as well. As an example, if you look at this, when you look at the hierarchical dimension, if I talk to my boss, I would potentially be respectful of the hierarchy. But if I talk to my team, and you go and my team is here as well, if you talk to someone from my team, how would you feel? And you can be honest.
He's very respectful about his team. So I never find him harsh or rude. I'm not sure from what is his culture and from where he come from, right? So, but he's very respectful while cascading the information or asking the information. So I appreciate it.
So basically, where I'm transitioning,
She gets a good performance evaluation, right?
I brought her here because the cycle is already over now.
So what did you put for negative feedback?
Right?
So if you look at that dimension, I mean, just to close this, if you look at that dimension and a few other dimensions, if I look at it from my perspective onto my team, I am potentially shifting. But if you look at me reporting into my next levels higher up, I am probably rooting into the culture. So that's the difference that I have observed.
That is very cool.
Who's next? Come on.
So I'll be very honest, I looked at this, I went, oh, I work with people from all over, we have a global team, I'm very adaptable, and then I just got called out because I matched most of that America. A little bit more in the center, but still it had the same shape. So I feel like I've just been called out. It hasn't been, right, so you make those adjustments a little bit, depending on who you work with and those experiences, but at the end of the day, this is still me. This is still my approaches and how I was, what shaped me from the beginning. So yeah, there's some shifts here, but not as dramatic because the ending shape is still very similar. Yeah.
Really appreciate that. I feel very similar. Who else wants to share something?
So, hi. So, we are talking about this cultural thing with which we can adapt to the other party in the team, right? So when I look at my table, I found a zigzag. This is what I found in the team most. But when I see mine, I'm an outlier. Okay. So how does it one do? So that's a follow-up question. I'm going into a table. I'm thinking this is how this particular group, if a person is here, he is my project manager or someone I need to report. I'm going with the notion, with this what I learned, they may be acting in a certain way, but there is an outlier. How do we tackle him?
Well, great question. We're going to tackle it, we're going to answer it in just a couple of minutes as we wrap it up.
Thank you.
Brilliant. One more?
Yeah.
So this is based on my experience on working on my latest engagement. So I always used to work with clients from the US for a very long period of time. But from the last 10 months, I'm working with a German client. And and what I noticed is they're very, very respectful of time. Whereas on my previous projects, we used to prioritize, let's say, closing out a discussion and then taking it for the next few minutes. Whereas here, it's like, I need to jump, because there are people waiting on the other call. So that's one really big change that I noticed. And also in terms of communicating the feedback, they're not really paying too much attention to the way the messaging is set. It's only about the message that is getting conveyed. So sometimes it might come across as somebody who's a straight shooter, but when you talk to them the next time, it's absolutely nothing that is personal. They're just communicating feedback in a way where they're very direct, very pointed feedback, and with a lot of specifics. I think the attention to detail that I noticed here when I'm working with the German clients is that they do a lot of research themselves before pointing out that there is an issue. So they come well prepared to prove that this is actually going wrong because of these observations. So, yeah.
No, thank you for that. And actually here I am going to make a confession. Italians love to make fun of Germans, but secretly we want to be more like Germans because they get stuff done on time, don't necessarily take work home, and they have a healthier lifestyle. So I secretly aspire to be like that. No chance I'll ever be like Martina. Anyway, so we had a really important question. So how do you use this? And this is also how we wrap this thing up. I wanna, before I answer the question, Martina and I are in love with this quote because it effectively summarizes why this type of work and these conversations are important. So as globalization transforms the way we work, we need the ability to decode cultural differences in order to work effectively. So all the techniques, all the processes, all the things that we were talking about for these 3 days are great. But if we don't understand who is working alongside us, who's implementing those frameworks alongside us, the chance for challenges, disagreements, lack of understanding increases and becomes higher. So how do we use this tool? How do we work across our differences? We got to be explicit. So I think that one of the biggest gifts that I got from one of my managers a long time ago, and coincidentally, it also was, he worked with Martina as well, was about being explicit, not hiding behind the personas that we bring to work, but being explicit about what we want, what we need, and who we are. It's about being curious. If I walked into this room and pretended to know everything about your cultures, you'd think that, so I pretend to know everything about Germans, but just because I spent so much time with Martina. But I wouldn't be credible, nor would be Martina, if we pretended, if we didn't express curiosity. The same happens at work. When and it's, you know, keeping those dimensions in mind is really important because you can be curious and be perceived as invasive depending on who you're talking to. So you need to be sensitive about the differences. But if you're explicit about where you come from, what you're used to, and it's not about apologizing, but saying, hey, I am going to say this thing how I know how to say it, but please, it's not personal, it's how I communicate. Let me know if that doesn't work for you. By the way, where do you come from? What do you think about this? It's a completely different conversation. You gotta be open-minded, and that goes without saying, but it's very easy to judge someone based on our own culture, where we come from, right? I can, you know, if I come from a culture where there is a respect for time, where time is money, where, you know, we talk about wasting time, and the meeting goes on, I can think that you're disrespecting me because I don't know, right? Because I'm not open-minded, I'm stuck to my guns. And you gotta be kind, right? Give people the grace of being who they are, you know, being, you know, going at things at their own pace and doing things their own way without, you know, jumping to conclusion. But more than all of this, the way you use, you know, this culture map to, whether you're an outlier or you're or you fall perfectly within a type, it's about minding the gap. Remember we were showing the differences? Why do you think Martina and I can work so well together? Because we're very aware of that gap, and we're explicit and intentional about how we meet somewhere in the middle. But if you don't know, it doesn't really matter where you are, so long as you're aware that other people do things in a different way and are in different places. And that's it. Thank you. And if you want to get in touch with us, that's one of the ways you can do it. Do we have a moment for a question? We're at time, but if there are any questions, Italian time. Let's continue the conversation.
Yeah. While we're wrapping up, go for it.
Oh, and if you want, we're going to share the slides with these templates, but we have some extras. So if you want to grab a few and take them, yeah, just come and grab them.
I have a question. Please. Okay, so thank you for a great session.
Take as many as you
So the
need.
question I had was, so Japan, you said it lies in the hierarchical as well as consensual, right? How does it go about? Consensual as well as hierarchical. They fall into both the patterns, right?
Yeah.
How does it happen? How do they manage with it?
The question was where do these dimensions come from? So Erin Meyer is a professor at INSEAD, and she's done a lot of research into culture. What are the dimensions that define different cultures, and that's where these cultural dimensions come from. So the culture map introduces her research and how she and more of the background of how she arrived at those. Really interesting.
Yeah, the question I have was,
sorry, I didn't hear that.
So leading and designing, right?
Yeah.
Japan is hierarchical,
yeah,
but consensual.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how do we go about that? Because both are contradicting, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting contradiction. How do they go about the way they do that? I think